March 14th, 2024, 7:18 in the morning, just north of Wichita, Kansas, under a sky still heavy from 2 days of rain. A construction site fell into a kind of silence that didn't belong there. Not the kind of silence that follows a job well done. The kind that settles in when something has gone very wrong. Right in the middle of a half-dug foundation pit, a $300,000 excavator stood frozen. The machine was almost new paint, still clean. Hydraulics recently serviced, every system checked twice before the job began, and yet its arm was locked. The bucket was buried deep into thick clay, angled slightly downward, as if it had taken one last bite of earth, and the ground had refused to give it back. The operator tried again. Hydraulics groaned. Pressure climbed. The arm trembled. And then, nothing. No lift. No release. Just resistance. A kind of resistance that didn't feel mechanical. One of the younger engineers stepped closer. Eyes fixed on the diagnostic screen mounted inside the cab. "Pressure's good. No fault codes," he muttered, scrolling faster like the answer might appear if he moved quick enough. But everyone standing there already knew this wasn't a machine problem. It was something else. The ground here wasn't ordinary soil, not after rain like this. The clay had turned heavy, dense, almost adhesive. It didn't just hold things, it gripped them. Every time the bucket tried to move, it didn't just drag it, sealed itself deeper, tightening the earth around it, like a vacuum forming under pressure. Another attempt, more power this time. The engine roared louder, the machine shook, and the arm didn't move an inch. Instead, the entire body of the excavator sank just slightly deeper into the mud, barely noticeable, but enough. A few workers exchanged glances. Someone in the back let out a quiet whistle, and then Marcus Hale stepped forward. He didn't rush, didn't look worried. Not yet. Marcus was the kind of man who had built a reputation on solving problems like this. Owner of Hale Development Group, multi-million-dollar projects, deadlines that never slipped. He stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the mezzanine like it had just made a mistake. "Lift it again," he said. The operator hesitated for half a second, then obeyed. The hydraulics strained. The system pushed harder. Still nothing. The clay didn't give. It held. And for the first time that morning, something shifted. Not in the machine, not in the ground, but in the air. Because what they were looking at now wasn't just a delay. It was a loss of control. "Nothing gets stuck," Marcus said louder this time, almost like he was correcting the situation itself. "You're just not pulling it right." But the truth was already there, sitting in that pit. The machine wasn't failing. It was being held. And what nobody there understood yet was that the ground had already decided the outcome. But that wasn't the part people would remember. What people would remember was who showed up next. About 20 minutes later, after 2 more failed attempts, and a second excavator being brought in, just to try and assist, an unfamiliar sound drifted in from the dirt road, leading to the site. It wasn't loud. It didn't roar. It didn't demand attention. It crept in slow. Metal against earth, a steady rhythmic clanking. Track links moving over hardened mud. People turned almost all at once. From beyond the line of parked trucks and equipment, an old crawler tractor was making its way toward the pit. The paint was faded, worn thin, in places where metal showed through. Rust traced along the edges like a memory that refused to leave. Smoke rose gently from its exhaust, thin, uneven. Nothing about it looked impressive, and the man driving it looked even less so. Samuel Carter. He didn't rush, didn't wave, didn't try to get anyone's attention. He just drove in and stopped, turned the engine off, and looked. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the excavator, then the ground, then the way the tracks had sunk, the way the clay had shifted around the bucket, like he was reading something no one else there even realized existed. Marcus noticed him a second later, brows furrowed. "Sir," he called out, stepping closer, "this is an active job site. We've got professionals handling this." Samuel gave a small nod, didn't argue, did not explain, and for a moment it looked like he might just turn around and leave. But instead he took a few slow steps forward, closer to the pit, closer to the machine. Then he spoke. "You're not getting that out like that." It wasn't loud. It didn't carry far. But it was enough. A couple of workers near the edge chuckled immediately. Marcus let out a short laugh, shaking his head, like he'd just heard something mildly entertaining. "And you are," he asked. Turning slightly so more people could hear, Samuel didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the bucket, half swallowed by clay. "If you keep pulling," he said, "calm and steady, you're going to lock it in deeper." That got a bigger reaction. A young engineer stepped forward, tablet still in hand. "That's not how this works," he said quickly. "We're distributing load. We're managing pressure. This is standard procedure." Someone behind him laughed. "Yeah," another voice added. "This isn't 1920 anymore." The laughter spread easier now. Marcus smiled wider, turning slightly to the group feeding off it. "We've got $300,000 worth of engineering right here," he said, gesturing toward the excavator. "And somehow, we missed the part where a farm tractor solves it." More laughter. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Marcus pointed directly at the crawler. "That thing he said belongs in a museum." And then, looking straight at Samuel, "It's not moving that machine." There it was. Not just dismissal. Public. Confident. Final. And for a second, it felt like the moment had settled, like the outcome had already been decided. But Samuel didn't react, didn't defend himself, didn't argue. He just stood there, quiet, still. And if anyone had been paying close enough attention, they might have noticed something strange. He wasn't standing like a man guessing. He was standing like a man who had already seen the ending. But to understand why, you have to go back long before that excavator ever touched the ground. Long before Marcus Hale ever stepped onto that site. Back to a stretch of land that most people would have walked away from. The Carter farm sat about 40 miles outside Wichita, where the soil turned heavy the deeper you dug. Clay-rich, unforgiving. The kind of ground that didn't respond well to force. Samuel grew up there, not with new equipment, not with options, with what they had. And what they had wasn't much. His grandfather came to that land in the late 1920s, carrying little more than tools and a machine nobody else wanted. A crawler from 1928. Even then, it was considered outdated, too slow, too heavy, not efficient. But his grandfather didn't see it that way. He saw something else. He saw a machine that didn't quit. So they rebuilt it, piece by piece, without manuals, without proper parts, just intuition, repetition, and time. Samuel remembered the sound of metal echoing through the barn when he was a boy, the smell of oil, the way his grandfather would stop mid-repair, just to listen, not to the engine, to how it responded. His father took over that machine years later. By then, he had seen modern equipment, faster equipment, stronger equipment, but he never replaced the crawler. He changed it. Subtle adjustments, gear ratios modified, torque shifted, not to make it faster, but to make it steady, consistent, relentless in a way most machines weren't. Fast power breaks things. His father told him once, standing in that same barn grease on his hands. Slow power moves them. Samuel didn't fully understand it then, but he remembered it because he saw it. That crawler had pulled tractors out of flooded fields when newer machines just spun their tires. It had dragged fallen structures after storms. It had worked in conditions where nothing else could even stay upright. Not because it was stronger, because it didn't fight the ground the same way. And that was the part nobody at that construction site knew. Because while they were looking at the excavator, Samuel was looking at the soil. And what he saw wasn't a problem that needed more force. It was a problem that needed understanding. By the time Samuel finished speaking, the situation on site had already begun to unravel in ways Marcus didn't expect. The second excavator had been brought in larger, newer, fitted with reinforced hydraulics. Steel cables were attached, carefully measured angles, calculated load distribution. Everything was done by the book. Everything looked right. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, watching closely. Now no longer smiling as easily. There was tension in his jaw. Not visible to most people, but it was there. "All right," one of the engineers called out. "We lift together on 3. The two machines engaged. Engines roared. Hydraulics strained. Cables tightened to their limits. For a moment it looked promising. The stuck arm, trembled. The bucket shifted just slightly. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. And then the ground answered back. A low, heavy sound rose from beneath the clay, like something compressing deep underground. And the excavator didn't rise. It sank. Not dramatically. Just enough. Just enough for everyone to feel it. Stop, someone shouted. The engines cut. Silence. Again. The machine hadn't come free. It had gone deeper. A few workers stepped closer, staring into the pit. One of them shook his head slowly. That shouldn't happen. But it had. And now there was no laughter, only confusion. Marcus turned to his lead engineer. "What's going on?" The engineer hesitated. "Just for a second. Then the soil's behaving differently than expected." Marcus didn't like that answer. "Fix it," he said. They tried again. More adjustments. Different angles. Reduced load spikes. Controlled pull. Everything precise. Everything calculated. And still, nothing, except deeper resistance. The clay had tightened. What had been a stuck machine was becoming a buried one. More people had gathered by now. Workers from neighboring sites. Locals who heard something had gone wrong. Phones were out again. But the tone had changed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was something else. A problem nobody could solve. And in the middle of all of it, Samuel Carter hadn't moved. He stood off to the side near his crawler, watching the ground. Not the cables, not the machines, the ground. He noticed how the surface cracked slightly around the bucket when force was applied. How the edges sealed again when the pull stopped. How the moisture shifted, forming a kind of grip that tightened with pressure instead of loosening. And that was when he knew they weren't just pulling wrong. They were making it worse. But there was something else, something nobody else had even considered. Because this story wasn't really about the excavator. It was about what was holding it. Marcus exhaled sharply and looked around, frustration finally breaking through. "Anyone got a better idea?" He called out, half sarcasm, half challenge. No one answered. Except, "I do." The voice didn't rise above the others, but it carried. Samuel stepped forward again. This time fewer people laughed. Marcus turned slower now. "You're serious?" he asked. Samuel nodded once. "I'll get it out," he said. No explanation, no pitch, just a statement. Marcus let out a breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You understand what you're dealing with here," he said. "That machine weighs over 70,000 pounds. Samuel looked at the excavator again, then back at the ground. "You're not lifting it," he said quietly. "You're holding it down." That sentence landed differently. Even the engineer didn't interrupt this time. Marcus hesitated, only for a second, then shrugged slightly. "Fine," he said. "Go ahead." There was still arrogance in his voice, but now there was something else mixed in. Curiosity. Samuel didn't waste time. He walked back to his crawler, opened a small wooden box mounted behind the seat, and pulled out a few things. Nothing impressive. A length of heavy iron chain, a couple of worn wooden planks. That was it. A few people exchanged looks. "That's it?" someone whispered. But Samuel wasn't looking at them. He moved toward the pit boot, sinking slightly into the mud with each step. He didn't go to the cables. Didn't touch the second excavator. He went straight to the bucket, knelt down, pressed his hand into the clay beside it. Then he started placing the planks, not under the machine. Not where most people would expect, but along the sides of the embedded bucket, angling them carefully, creating space where there was none. It didn't look like much. It didn't look powerful. It didn't even look like it would matter. And that was the part nobody understood, because what he was doing wasn't preparing to pull harder. He was preparing to release what was holding it. He stood up slowly, wiped his hands on his jacket, and walked back to the crawler. Hooked the chain, not to the strongest point, not to the most obvious one, but to a point that shifted the angle just slightly. Just enough. One of the engineers leaned toward another. "That angle's wrong." But Samuel had already climbed into the seat. He didn't rev the engine, didn't make a show of it. The crawler came to life with a low, steady rumble. And then he moved. Slow. Deliberate. The chain tightened. The crawler pulled. At first, nothing happened. No movement. No sound. just tension. Someone in the crowd sighed. Here we go. Another muttered same thing. But Samuel didn't stop. He did not increase speed. Didn't change anything. He just held the pull. Consistent, unbroken, like he was waiting for something. And for a few long seconds, it looked like nothing would change. But beneath the surface, something already had. And then there was a sound. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a dull, hollow crack from deep beneath the clay. The kind of sound you only hear when something gives way where you can't see it. A few heads turned. Did you hear that? Samuel did. He felt it more than he heard it. The tension in the chain shifted just slightly, and that was all he needed. He didn't pull harder, didn't speed up. He just kept the crawler moving. Steady, slow, unwavering. And then the excavator moved. Barely. A fraction of an inch. So small that most people missed it. But Samuel didn't, and neither did the ground. Another sound followed this one sharper. The clay, once compressed and sealed tight around the bucket, began to fracture internally. The vacuum that had been holding the machine in place for nearly an hour started to break. What? What is that? One of the engineers whispered. Marcus stepped closer to eyes locked on the machine. The crawler continued forward. No noise, no struggle, just force applied the right way. And then the bucket lifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but undeniably. A gasp rippled through the crowd. No way. The excavator's arm arose another inch, then another. The thick clay that had held it like concrete now loosened, collapsing inward, releasing its grip instead of tightening it. The seal was broken, and everything changed. Within seconds, what had seemed impossible began to look inevitable. The crawler kept pulling, slow, consistent, relentless. The excavator arm fully, cleanly. The entire machine shifted slightly forward, settling onto firmer ground. And then it was over. No explosion of effort, no final burst of power. Just release. Silence hit the site like a wave. No one moved. No one spoke. They were all looking at the same thing. A 1928 crawler, sitting quietly in front of a machine worth $300,000 that had just been saved. And for a moment, nobody knew what to say. Marcus stood there frozen. The confidence that had filled his voice earlier that morning, gone, replaced by something he wasn't used to carrying. He looked at the excavator, then at the ground, then slowly at Samuel. But Samuel had already shut the engine off. He stepped down from the crawler, unhooked the chain, and began coiling it back up, like it was just another job, like none of this had been unusual. What did you do? One of the engineers finally asked. Samuel paused, looked at him, then back at the ground. I didn't pull it out, he said. A small beat. I let it go. That answer didn't fit into any of their systems, didn't match any calculation. But standing there, with the evidence right in front of them, no one argued, because what they had just seen wasn't about power. It was about something they didn't measure. And in that moment, it wasn't just the excavator that had been freed. It was something else, something quieter, something harder to admit. A few hours later, the site was back in motion. The excavator was running again. Work resumed. But the story didn't stay there, because someone had recorded it. The laughter, the dismissal, the moment Samuel spoke, and the moment everything changed. Within 2 days, the video had spread far beyond Wichita. People weren't sharing it because of the machine. They were sharing it because of what it meant. Comments poured in. Old school beats new again. He wasn't stronger. He was smarter. Listened to the ground. And then there were the clips of Marcus, the ones where he laughed, where he pointed, where he said it belonged in a museum. Those were shared the most, not with anger, but with something sharper, recognition. Marcus saw it too. Every version, every replay, every comment. And for a man who had built his reputation on being right, it stayed with him. 3 days later, a pickup truck pulled up to the Carter farm. No cameras, no crew, just Marcus. He stepped out slowly, taking in the land, the soil, the quiet. Samuel was by the barn working on something small, barely looking up as Marcus approached. For a moment, Marcus didn't speak. Then finally, I was wrong. No defense, no excuse, just that. Samuel nodded once, like he had already known. Marcus glanced toward the old crawler parked in the shade. I don't understand how that worked, he admitted. Samuel set his tool down, looked out across the field. You were trying to win, he said. A pause. The ground wasn't fighting you. Marcus frowned slightly. It was holding you. Samuel continued, and you kept asking it to hold tighter. That sat there for a second. Marcus didn't answer, because he knew. That was exactly what had happened. Samuel picked up his tool again. Didn't make it a lesson. Didn't make it a speech, because he wasn't trying to prove anything. He never had been. And that was the part Marcus would carry with him long after. People like to think strength solves everything. That bigger machines, more power, more money, means control. And most of the time, that's enough. Until it isn't. Until you run into something that doesn't respond to force. Something that requires patience. Something that demands you understand it before you try to move it. That morning in Kansas, a $300,000 machine failed. Not because it was weak, but because it was used the wrong way. And an old crawler from 1928 didn't win because wrong. It won because the man driving it knew when not to fight. There's a kind of knowledge that doesn't come from manuals, doesn't show up on screens, doesn't impress a crowd. It looks quiet. It looks old. It looks like something people laugh at. Till the moment they need it. And by then, it's usually too late to pretend they understood it all along. Because sometimes, the slowest machine carries the deepest understanding, and the people who say the least are the ones who see the most.